Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. Does it ever feel like someone's watching you? Well, if you're a Chinese immigrant to the U.S., that may just be the case. Out here in California, I've personally heard of people who've had CCP-linked agents show up at their doorsteps with fake smiles full of dagger-like teeth to make veiled threats against them, like, your child does such a great job at such and such school, or your husband is so well liked at his job, at this company, on this street, at this office suite. Basically, the innuendo is that you might not know who we are, but we know everything about you, down to where your kids go to school or where your husband works, and it would be a shame if something were to happen. From there, the person is usually pressured into showing open support for Xi Jinping's regime or in sending money back to China in order to maintain their tenuous grasp on freedom here in this country. And again, yes, that's happening out here in America, in California. Well, now, even the New York Times is reporting on this phenomenon, noting how China and Iran are hiring private detectives in America to surveil dissidents living on our soil. This Washington Free Beacon recap gives this example from the piece, quote, "The Times revealed that New York private detective Michael McKeever was hired by Iranian intelligence agents in a suspected plot to kidnap Masih Alinejad, a prominent Iranian-American journalist who has criticized Iran's human rights abuses. McKeever, who believed he was working for an international client to track down a debtor, surveilled Alinejad at her house until the FBI informed him he was working for bad people," end quote. Later on in the article, an expert on terrorism was cited as saying that this policy, quote, "strikes me as low-cost, low-risk, state-sponsored terrorism in the 21st century," end quote. It's not just terrorism as such, there's also the PSYOP information war going on. After Biden spoke with China's Xi Jinping earlier this week on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Indonesia, video has now surfaced of yet another Western leader, this time Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, appearing weak and insipid before Xi. Take a look.
Everything we discuss is then leaked to the paper. That's not appropriate. And that's not how the way the conversation was conducted. If there is sincerity on your part,
free and open and frank dialogue, and that is what we will continue to have. We will continue to look to work constructively together, but there will be things we will disagree on, and we will have to continue.
Let's create the conditions first.
Is it just me, or does it look like Trudeau was kind of like waddling away, like he was off kilter after that? I mean, if he thought going full Mao on the Freedom Truckers was going to score many brownie points with the CCP, then he was sorely mistaken. Joining me now to discuss all this and more is Matthew Brodsky, a senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. Thanks for being here tonight, Matthew.
Great to be with you.
Great. So first, let me get your reaction to that clip we just watched with Trudeau and Xi Jinping. There's a lot going on there.
I mean, look, Justin Trudeau has been rather floppy for years, but I think it's one thing when you put him up against President Donald Trump as opposed to putting him up against Joe Biden. I mean, really, we don't have much of a policy. Now, if you're Xi Jinping, obviously you think that you have the wind at your sails because he's now essentially going to be leading China for life. Just had President Biden come over and really go to work on the climate change thing as though that's actually going to be a benefit for us as opposed to just giving a strategic victory to China. So there's no reason he shouldn't behave that way because no one's pushed back on it. And I guess Canada's Prime Minister is floppy as usual.
I mean, he is. And as you're mentioning with Biden and his own, face-to-face talk on the sidelines of the summit, I don't think, did he bring up fentanyl? Did he bring up COVID? I think that he was kept quiet on that. If he talked, who knows? Biden probably, who knows what he said? He probably doesn't even remember what was said or what wasn't said. I mean, how do you think that all went?
Well, look, if you're there, you need to bring up COVID. This killed more people than many wars that we've been in before. We need to know the origins. Thankfully, from this troubled election we just had here, at least Republicans have the House and can start getting into an investigation to go to the bottom of that, because we still don't have many answers. Now, Xi Jinping basically is playing us because he knows that Democrats have essentially they're using climate change and that as policy. It's almost a religion for them. It's the number one thing they want. It's what in the White House statement that Biden released was talking about food security and climate change. Climate change number one. And this is something we allow them to skate by, and then we have to put in a whole bunch of restrictions for ourselves. So, and that gets to energy policy. Our security policy is really bad for the United States, and it really benefits China, unfortunately.
And you think it's because so many of our elites, they kind of know where their bread gets buttered, in essence, that they know China, that a lot of them have deep ties, their own financial gains, are made, sadly, with China and some of their connections there into that, gigantic market. Do you think that may be driving us to why a lot of these Western leaders, sometimes they'll talk tough on China, but mostly it seems by their actions and the way they talk about this and the way they cower before Xi, it's almost as if they see China's rise at this point as just inevitable, just a given. And so they're just trying to hitch themselves to the star while they can.
Well, I mean, we'll certainly now with the House run by Republicans be able to get into investigations to actually see if Biden Inc. What they were making with China, what those kind of deals were that went through Hunter Biden. But I think we've had a problem for both sides of the political aisle for several presidencies, believing that we could bring China into our side, and instead they essentially just take and take from us, and realizing that we just prefer as Democrats to virtue signal our way into policy and that entangles us, that he's willing to play that game because he can give up some sort of cap on emissions by the year 2050 or something, and that'll make us change everything here. We're not going to drill for our own oil. We're not thinking strategically, and that is a big problem for the United States. Climate change is listed by the Biden Strategic National Security document as the number one existential threat facing the United States. In reality, it is China. We need to update our thinking and face the threats that are real and not just indulge fantasies.
And I was just thinking back to, I think it was last year in Alaska, I think actually National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and I think Secretary of State Antony Blinken were there, and their counterparts, Chinese counterparts, were there and gave them a tongue lashing as well. And they just sat there quietly because the Chinese officials were using a lot of woke terminology. So we see China, they kind of, as you were saying, whether it's climate change or anything else, they kind of weaponize what we're already virtue signaling about, but then they turn it back on us. And then the left, they can't really say anything because they proclaim to believe all these woke talking points. So when it's turned back on them, they're kind of caught flat-footed, and it doesn't, speak well for the rest of this nation when that's the kind of people leading us. And I do want to touch on this other story that I mentioned earlier about dissidents from China and Iran here in America being spied on by, their home countries with private investigators. Some private investigators don't even know who's hiring them, which I guess maybe shows that they don't have the greatest qualifications themselves if they don't know who's hiring them. But it's very, very scary. I actually know someone close to me as well who worked in law enforcement, and Obama came out here, and I think even I don't know if it was Xi or some high-level Chinese official had come out here to California, and there was a big motorcade, and there were actually people there, people who were Chinese, and they had their signs saying, "We love Xi, we love China, CCP is great." The thing is, though, it was all fake, because once the motorcade passed them and all the pictures were gone, they packed up and went. They didn't care. They were mad. They didn't want to be there, actually. And a lot of them, were saying that they were forced to be there. So, I mean, it is scary to see these foreign nations having so much power over people living here that we're supposed to be protecting. So if you could speak to that article as well.
Well, welcome to the world of the autocrat, right? We've seen this in my time living in Washington, D.C., with Turkey's Erdogan there, his people beating up protesters, having their own people there by the embassy. We've seen this from Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad. I have a lot of Syrian friends in Washington who are dissidents, and when it came to protest, there would be regime thugs or people hired by the regime who were looking in on them and monitoring it. Now, when we get to the issue of Iran, this is the largest danger of them all. I mean, we had Iran try in 2011, if you recall, to blow up a popular restaurant in Georgetown and to target Saudi Arabia and Israel. Now, the FBI broke up this plot, but really this did not deter the Obama administration at that time from going ahead and trying to enrich the regime with $150 billion of sanctions relief for a nuclear deal that he was trying to get. This is something that we do not respond well to. It's unfortunate. I think these private detectives, they need to learn, which it sounds like from the story that the FBI is trying to teach them how to tell if you're being employed by a foreign government. But it's something that the FBI has to really work and go after, and there needs to actually be policy consequences. It can't just be a law enforcement issue. That has to affect how we deal with foreign countries, and it means that we have to stop living in fantasy land and realize that Iran has really bad intentions when it comes to the United States and our allies, to not sweep it under the rug thinking that we can paper it over with some equally bad nuclear deal like we had in 2015.
Well, Matt, I've really appreciated speaking with you. Thanks for your analysis tonight.
Always a pleasure.